Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be spending some time with you today. My name is Stephen Brozovich. I'm in the Executives and Residents team. Today, we're going to spend time diving into how failure can actually lead to breakthroughs within organizations. I started my journey in August of 1999, which was a little while ago. Yes, the de-aging AI does a wonderful job with the photos on the screen, but I've got to live through a lot of the large-scale transformations that have defined the leadership and organizational challenges that Amazon has navigated over the years, moving from monolithic architectures to microservices, from waterfall to agile development, from shared centralized resources to distributed autonomous teams, and from IT as a cost center to technology as a business driver. Now, each of those major inflection points were driven in part because of failure, because the current way of working just wasn't yielding the results we were looking for anymore. We needed to pivot and learn a new approach. And on that journey, each of those journeys, we had dozens, if not hundreds, of failures. Now that language, hundreds of failures, that can be a little scary, right? It's an uncomfortable terminology, right? It has a negative connotation to it, but the reality is that all of those instances of failure were necessary and valuable for making progress. And the same can be said for failures in most organizations. Right, why is that? Well, because failure fuels learning. When something doesn't work, it reveals gaps in assumptions, processes, or understanding. Those insights can often be the most valuable data an organization can act on. Failure also accelerates innovation and better products. Progress depends on experimentation. Small failures along the way are the natural byproducts of testing bold new ideas, and often the stepping stones to breakthroughs that wouldn't emerge otherwise. Failures also help you rule out options. You learn through those failures what you shouldn't do. And finally, failure builds resilience. Organizations that normalize and study their own failures become more adaptable. They recover faster, they adjust strategies more effectively, and they can sustain momentum while navigating uncertainty. Now, if failure is beneficial, then we should fail sooner and more often. In fact, that's where the concept of fail fast comes from, right? How do I fail on an experiment rather than a big commitment before I'm trying a new idea? The organizations that fail fast increase the pace of their learning and innovation. And this is a concept that we've understood really early on at Amazon. Jeff Bezos described failure and innovation as inseparable twins. Now that may sound like we're okay with failure at Amazon, but that's not quite the case. At Amazon, we don't have a culture that accepts failure. We have a learning culture. Anytime I run an experiment, I get a result. Now, that result may or may not be what I was hoping for, but in an experiment methodology, that's not a failure as long as we learned something. Now, if we don't learn anything from an experiment, or if we fail to internalize those learnings and we keep repeating the same mistakes over and over, that is as unacceptable in Amazon as it would be in most of your organizations. What we do accept is that failure is unavoidable in experimentation. And we've had a lot of notable failures. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, the Fire Phone. We can have a long conversation about that. How many of you remember Prime Pantry? Yeah, you can tell. Okay. So Prime Pantry was this take on everyday essentials. What we did is we would charge you a flat fee for a box, and you could fit as much stuff into it as possible as long as the total weight was under 45 pounds and the size was no bigger than 3.6 cubic feet. We gave you all the weight and measurement data and let you cram in as much as possible into this box. So it's kind of like Tetris, but with math. And it turns out nowhere near as fun. Or how many of you remember these guys? Right? The dash buttons. These were physical buy now buttons that you could place anywhere in your home. And if you ran low on a product, all you had to do was click the button and it would automatically reorder more. We had customers that had dozens of these buttons all over their house for all kinds of products. Just it turns out, not a whole lot of customers. Or how about this? The Amazon treasure truck. Anybody ever see one of these? right? This was like a modern day ice cream truck for adults. We had these around many cities around the country, complete, bubble machines and thumping music. But instead of ice cream, what we had was an amazing deal on a particular product, like an inflatable paddleboard or a bag of steaks. I mean, we really doubled down on these trucks all over the country. But it turned out that customers actually preferred home delivery to trying to figure out where we had parked the treasure truck. Now, don't get the impression that failure only happens on the retail side of Amazon's business. We've had failures and setbacks within Amazon Web Services as well. How about Amazon Sumerian, a platform for building virtual or augmented reality, or QLDB, our attempt to bring blockchain-style immutability into database services, or Amazon Honeycode, a low-code, no-code option used for building mobile and web apps. Each of these was a marvel in its own right. But in some way, each of these was disconnected from what customers actually needed. And ultimately, none of them saw the traction that we had been hoping for. So where and how do things fail? Today, we're going to explore 3 different lenses of failure through people, process, and technology. But let's first start with people. Now, several years ago, there was an organization at Amazon that had some major customer deliveries. And their leader at the time believed that the best way to drive accountability was through control. So he would have a weekly meeting where all 200 people in the organization had to join that meeting. And one by one, they would walk through the status of every project that was in flight. And the leader would ask, are you red, yellow, or green? And if the answer was anything other than green, it wasn't a good answer. How dare you be yellow? In some extreme cases, I saw that leader take a project away from one person and give it to someone else right there in front of everyone. He had bred a culture of fear. The signal was, if you admit risk, you lose ownership. So what happened? All of a sudden, all the projects turned green on the outside. We like to call them watermelon goals. They're green on the outside. You cut that thing open and it is red. Teams stopped surfacing problems. Deliverables slipped, and customers were disappointed. That leader had adopted a culture of blame rather than one of accountability. He was trying to increase follow-through and delivery, but got the exact opposite result. Eventually, there was a leadership change and a change in approach. And that leader told me it took him 6 months for the team to finally realize that he wasn't there to fire them. He was there to help them succeed. And that's when things started to change. The focus shifted from punishment to enablement, from who's at fault to what do you need. Psychological safety became the foundation for true accountability. The lesson here is simple. Fear can create the illusion of control, but it's trust that creates the conditions for performance. Accountability doesn't come from intimidation, it comes from empowerment. And that's what transformed this team and its results. Transformation is a recurring theme when it comes to failure. And there's perhaps no better example of that than our first customer service company, Intercom, here to share their story of organizational setbacks and how they emerged stronger. I'm delighted to invite to the stage co-founder and chief strategy officer of Intercom, Des Traynor.
Thank you and good afternoon. So this is truly a story of reinvention. What do you do when you realize the business you've been working on for 15 years or 13 years at a time is almost certainly going to die? And this is what I will be talking about. Intercom, in case you're not familiar, we're broadly known as a customer service platform, customer support primarily. You've probably seen the Intercom Messenger on all of the sites you've ever been to, or if you haven't seen it, you've seen somebody who ripped it off. And generally, like, Intercom was a super hit pretty much from the get-go. We did like 1 million to 50 million in revenue in ARR in like 3 years, back when that was impressive. And we basically, grew up, matured, and heading in towards, say, 2020, we were like hundreds of millions in revenue, talking about IPO, etc. Everything was going great. We were all clearly geniuses. And of course, when you start thinking about like the bigger picture, and you're like, all right, now we're a big, mature, at-scale company, the temptation is to always expand your ambition and broaden your mandate in some sense. And If you've ever seen that movie, won 7 Oscars, Everything Everywhere All at Once, that was basically our strategy, unfortunately, right? When you're successful, the temptation is to think, well, we're good at everything, so we should basically do everything. So that was what we were doing. And that brought with it some problems. If we just skip forward a bit, what happened was we were trying to execute everything on all fronts. And the worst part was we were doing this during peak ZERP era, right? This was the time when you could do anything and it seemed to work out, because this was a time when people were buying, NFTs, like literally buying pictures of rocks for $1 million and thinking it was an investment, etc. Those were good days. But what this kind of like lofty area of success meant for us was that like our dashboards, anything that should have given us feedback that says, hey, the strategy is not working, everything was telling us everything was great. So if anything, we were getting the feedback that you should just keep going, what you're doing is great. And then one day, seemingly out of nowhere, things started to go wrong. I don't know if you remember where you were in 2022, but I certainly do. We went from like the crazy world of crypto and NFTs and all that sort of stuff through to like, layoffs and doom and gloom and drama. And all of the people who were previously telling me that they were geniuses because their strategies couldn't fail had now learned all sorts of new words like exogenous risk factors and macroeconomic shock and all that. They had much better ways to explain why things weren't working. And then as if to add to the humility and the heartburn, one day, 3 years ago, pretty much to the day, I opened a browser after getting a link and I played with this thing, which we all kind of remember roughly where we were when we first encountered ChatGPT. And obviously everyone's first few queries with ChatGPT were a bit derpy, like it was like, oh, how old is this? Or how does that work or whatever. For us, the first query I tried once I'd realized what I was dealing with was like, how do I fix an issue with my browser? And it answered it perfectly. And then the next one I tried was something to do with my home printer, which of course was broken, but ChatGPT was able to answer it shockingly quickly. And what that made me realize is, oh my God, we sell seats to humans to sit in them to do customer support. And now here's this thing that's going to do customer support instantly, accurately, 24/7, every language. Ruh-roh, this is bad news to be selling seats, right? So we very quickly had a lot of discussion about this internally. It's a fact that companies will only ever change from inspiration or desperation. And thankfully, we had a pitch for both in Intercom. We said, hey, look, there's an opportunity to become the AI leader in the customer support category. If we do it, the chances are huge, or the opportunity is huge. And if we fail, by the way, the company's going to definitely die and no one will have a job. So take your choice, And I spoke with our CEO, Owen, all through the weekend. ChatGPT launched on a Thursday. We chatted all through the weekend. And on a Monday morning, we agreed the only thing we could do, the only bet, was to go all in on AI. How far would we go? Too far. It was the only way to know we could go far enough, right? We had to be unrelenting. And I think one of the mistakes I see a lot of companies make in their adaptation to AI is they think it's just about dabbling. They sort of say, well, here's our dashboard, here's our fancy features. We're just going to add in a little smattering of AI features. Job done. The job is not done, right? It's extremely important that you have to adapt fully to AI. And that was what we learned and what we executed on. All through this, everyone kept asking for some degree of certainty. Well, when is this going to be over? Or like, when can we go back to normal? And the reality is, there is no going back, right? We had to rip up literally everything. And in this period, we had no certainty. We had 20 competitors, practically billions of funding invested into them. We had like 2 or 3 model drops that resulted in us entirely ripping up our roadmap and having to start again. There was no certainty anywhere. The only trick we learned was stop looking for certainty. It ain't coming. The hard questions and the inconvenient truths we had to ask ourselves were things like this. What would a company build if they started today in this space? Who would they hire? How would they go to market? How would they price? Where would they base themselves? Would they go all in on the basic sort of models? Would they build their own models? We had to work all this out and ask ourselves all these really inconvenient questions. And we went through it, and the result of it was 17 weeks later, we released Finn. And I'll come back to Finn in a bit. Finn is like the AI agent that does customer service. And it has been a success, but to build it has been one of the hardest things I think most of us had to pull off in our entire career. So we literally took a wrecking ball to everything that made Intercom special, which was horrible, but it had to be done. And everything about like how you build software and how you survive AI is just totally different. Some examples that I'll cover quickly. Like in the SaaS era of AI, it was all about UI. It was like, who had the nicest customer experience, who had the most beautiful drop-downs or fancy roadmap tools or whatever it might be, right? And the actual code that executed it was kind of like taken for granted in a sense. In AI, everyone's UI is just a text area. It's just a little chat box, right? But actually, does the thing work is the actual question. And as a result, what's happening beneath the surface, the actual code, how well it's been engineered, how well it's been prompted, what the AI architecture is, what models you use, whether you've trained them yourselves, etc. That's where it all matters. We have to literally reimagine how we build software because of this. We have to throw away so much stuff. The reality is software's gone from being like a sort of a factory type thing to being much more like a lab. We first of all determine what's possible through experimentation. If it's not possible, we scope it down until it is possible. And we keep going until we find something that we can definitely ship, that will definitely work. And even when it's live, we don't stop there because we have to see how it performs in the wild. The result of all this experimentation is this is probably the most important chart for Intercom internally is this is Finn's resolution rate. So given a question, can it answer it perfectly instantly? When we launched when we launched Finn 1 right after ChatGPT, it was about 24%. Today, it's about 66%. That means literally Finn can do 66% of your entire customer support volume. That is very much a category changing tool. But to build it was extremely painful, and it took this rigorous approach. Intercom was famous for all of these fancy product principles as to how you should really build great software. We had to abandon all of this stuff. And it pissed people off, it upset people, it disempowered people. But it was the only way. We had to change, for example, how we design. Historically, design has always been the designers go off into a forest, they come up with a design, and we tweak it, right? But in reality, because of AI, you can now explore dozens of different directions at the same time. We now literally vibe code out our entire roadmap to see what's coming and see if we like the look of it. If you haven't changed your design approach, you're not adapting to AI. Similarly, we had to change our entire org chart. So we used to always believe in Conway's law, this idea that you'll ship your org chart. We were always like, that's a feature, right? Well, just design your product, then design your org around your product, and then you should be fine. And so that's what we used to always do. But in reality, when you're building agentic workflows, what you actually have to do is look at different parts and different aspects of your product. And we have to go and rob people from every aspect just to build a workflow. And that's just all these painful changes. You end up with groups with no manager, managers with no teams, all sorts of stuff like that. We invented job titles. We have AI designers who is responsible for basically working out how well can we prompt effectively. What's the minimum input we need from users? What's the maximum output we can get? We had to change who our buyer was. We used to sell to support leaders. Turns out turkeys don't vote for Thanksgiving most of the time. So what you'll find is the terminal buyer of AI is often somebody slightly more economical. We find ourselves a lot of time pitching to CCOs, CROs, CFOs, CIOs, but very rarely to the actual function lead. And we had to do all of this to basically build and reinvent a new company, refound Intercom in the form of Finn. And people keep asking us, when's it going to relax? Well, it's not going to relax. It will never be chill again, right? To round out, Finn went from $0 to 12 million ARR in its first year. It's on track to pass $100 million. It wins all of the bake-offs. It covers every channel, every type of support, phone, voice, email, text, you name it. It has been a success story. It has also propelled Intercom back to where we belong, in our opinion, which is that we are now amongst the top fast-growing companies when compared amongst similar stage public company peers. So if I was to try and distill down what lessons that you might be able to transpose onto your own company, the first is one thing that really mattered was adopting an AI native software development lifecycle, right? You have to change how you build software. We are empirical now. It is science first, factory second. That is a huge, huge thing. A second is that you have to also sell an AI native product. So you can't just sell an old school thing with a copilot on the side. That is not enough. You have to agentify yourself, or your competitors will. The companies that don't correct themselves will get corrected by the market, and the market will not half-ass it, and it will not hesitate. And the third piece I see a lot of companies doing is don't wait for your customers to ask. When we first released Finn, it wasn't exactly what our customers wanted. They were like, no, I want another inbox feature. But it was essential, because if we didn't start building it and waited until they asked, by the time they asked, we would be out of the market. We'd be dead. And I think that's the thing. You have to move in advance of things. That's what makes you a market leader and not a market follower. If I was to conclude on anything, I'd just say this has been the craziest and most chaotic time we've ever built software. It's been exciting. It's been scary. It's been terrifying to face the death. I've only ever had one job in Intercom, and it was about to go away. We fought back. Who knows where the future will go, but I hope these lessons have been useful. I'm Des. My company is Finn. It's at Finn.ai. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, Des. What a great example and a great reminder that failure itself can be that invitation to reinvention. It takes a courageous group of people and willingness to challenge existing formulas for success to unlock new possibilities. The next lens of failure we're going to take a look at is process. And I want to share an example from Amazon's history of how good intentions turned into unhelpful bureaucracy. A while back, we had a program called the New Project Initiative, or NPI, right? This was a central mechanism that we used to plan, prioritize, and track cross-organizational work. At that stage in our growth, anytime there was a new business initiative that would come up, it would often require work from dozens of different teams who already had committed roadmaps for delivery that would have to be reshuffled to accommodate that new request. Now, the idea behind NPI was really solid. But over time, that mechanism became a machine that consumed more and more resources. Each team had to pay what we jokingly called the NPI tax, right? You had to fill out templates, you had to make forecasts, and assign people just to provide estimates, not even talking about the actual work at this point. We had program managers managing program managers on both sides of the process. And the more we invested in it, the slower it got. Finally, eventually, someone had the courage to flip the process on its head. Instead of seeing that overhead as the cost of doing business, they reimagined it as a tax map. And whenever the tax was heaviest, those hot spots showed us exactly where our architecture was weakest. The real pain wasn't the process itself, it was what the process was hiding. Those bottlenecks revealed where our systems were too tightly coupled, where we had built dependencies instead of autonomy. And so we flipped it. Instead of blaming the teams, we invested in the bottlenecks. We re-architected those services so coordination wouldn't require meetings. We could handle that through APIs and well-defined interfaces. And once that happened, we didn't need NPI anymore. That's the irony. The process that failed to scale became the signal that showed us how to scale. By turning the failure inside out, we found the roadmap to a much more efficient, more modular Amazon. The last lens of failure we're going to take a look at is technology. And certainly over the 2-decade history of AWS, we've had our own set of failures and setbacks. Service disruptions are an inevitable part of operating any large and complex technology. But what I want to focus on today is what we do when failures happen. How do we make sure as much as possible that the same failures don't happen twice and that we learn from each one? At Amazon, we have a proven mechanism that's intended to prevent us from repeating the same mistakes by turning failures into learning. It's called correction of error. Now, notice the name. It's not called cause of error because we're not looking for someone to blame. We're looking to learn from the outcome and figure out what we need to do to keep it from happening again. We look at the impact of an incident, who was impacted, how, and what were the second-order effects of that situation. We map out a timeline of the incident, cover everything from detection to diagnosis and mitigation. In fact, this is the very process that we used when we experienced a service disruption in October to learn from the event and to determine the operational changes we needed to make to prevent that type of failure from happening again. And if anyone is curious to learn more about that incident and our particular response to that incident, you can scan the QR code here to learn more. Now, anytime we experience some kind of a failure, we like to ask the 5 whys. Now, we don't stop ourselves at 5. We actually go and keep asking why until we get down to the root cause so that we can then determine what actions we can take to prevent it from happening again. If you're familiar with our well-architected framework, what you've read incorporates a lot of learnings from our correction of error efforts. There was no playbook for us to follow to become a hyperscale cloud and AI provider. The well-architected guidelines we developed as AWS learned and grew. Because as we went and grew, and in some cases failing, but then translating those failures into the best practices that now guide cloud-native development for tens of thousands of businesses around the world. The correction of error process is one way we work to make our technology better with every failure. And sometimes, though, with technology, the challenges aren't because of the technology itself, but because of the way that we are incorporating that technology to solve customer challenges. That's what happened to financial technology company Intuit. Here to share the story of how they learned from their customers and reimagined their business to go all in on AI, I'm excited to welcome to the stage Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of Intuit, Alex Balazs.
Thank you, Stephen. Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Balazs, Intuit's Chief Technology Officer, and I'm here to tell you about the journey that we were on at Intuit. Intuit, for those of you who may not know, is a global financial technology platform serving over 100 million consumers, small businesses, mid-market, and accountants. And about 7 years ago, we declared a strategy to be an AI-driven expert platform. And ever since we made that declaration, we've invested about $1 billion in data and AI capabilities at Intuit. And the reason we did it is because we wanted to deliver what we call done-for-you experiences. So they're experiences where our customers don't have to do the work, we do the work for them. And of course, with the launch of ChatGPT, we knew that this would be an accelerant to this strategy. And so we share a similar mindset to Amazon in that we want to move fast, we want to have a bias towards learning, and we want to be extremely customer obsessed. And so our instinct was, let's take this technology and let's put it into the hands of our customers as quickly as we can. And so we delivered something we refer to as Intuit Assist. And Intuit Assist in the simplest form is basically a chatbot that was bolted onto the side of our products, and it allowed customers to interact in a natural language way. And for our TurboTax customers, our Credit Karma customers, and even our MailChimp customers, it was a fairly successful endeavor. Our QuickBooks customers did not like it at all. They did not show up to have a conversation with QuickBooks. They showed up because they have a business to run. They have problems to solve. And suddenly we had the flashing cursor problem. So what do I type? What do I ask? And even if I ask a question, is it going to be accurate? And so this open-ended interface, this open-ended, unprompted conversation actually led to lower trust. It actually led to more complexity, and it actually made it harder for our customers to work. And so since the company's founding, we've used what we call Follow Me Home. And Follow Me Home method basically is you go to your customers and you watch them work. You watch them interact with your products, and you do it in their environment. And that's how you truly figure out what the pain points are, because it's not like bringing them into a research lab. You actually go to them and see how they actually work. And one of the really interesting things that we saw in our small business customers is that very commonly they'd have two monitors. They'd have QuickBooks on one side, and they'd have something else on the other. That something else could be handwritten notes. It could be a spreadsheet. It could be some kind of data source. And they literally were transposing data from one side to the other. And we said, wow, they're basically copying the data back and forth or from one side to the other. And we realized that not only were we solving the wrong problem, we were thinking way too small. It wasn't enough to simply bolt AI, automation, natural language on top of our products. We had to reimagine the entire experience. And it also meant that we had to go all in. Because if we were truly going to revolutionize these experiences, change these experiences fundamentally, and make them be done for you, we couldn't toe dip. We couldn't kind of do it partially. We had to reimagine the entire experience end to end. And what started off as a way that we were going to change QuickBooks has really become the foundation for how we are leveraging and implementing AI across Intuit. So we moved towards creating self-contained, cross-functional teams with a single-threaded leader. And so instead of being focused on functions, they were focused on solving an entire end-to-end experience and solving it well. And so that shift actually got us to also question a lot of preconceived notions we had about how we build product at Intuit. So one of them was that AI could not just be for people with PhDs or people with specialized backgrounds. Everyone across the entire company had to be engaged with and use AI. engineers, obviously, designers, product managers, everyone, it had to be a core part of their job. Another principle was everyone has to talk to the customer. It can't just be the research team. Everyone had to be involved in the product development team, product development process, had to talk to the customer. We also had to transform the technology itself. So we dismantled a lot of the sequential processes that we had built up over 40 years. So we created this thing called GenOS, our generative AI operating system, and that's the thing that all of our products are built on, and it became foundational for everything that we do. But the historic approach of how you approach creating shared capability, platform capability, we kind of had to turn this on its head. And so what we did is we actually created something that we refer to as a harvesting model. So instead of product teams saying, hey, I need this kind of capability, build it for me, the product teams themselves, who now were AI savvy and they actually had to build this capability themselves, they innovated. They figured out what that next experience was. And then there was a team that basically went after them and harvested these great ideas and then integrated them into the platform and then basically made them available to everyone else. So it greatly reduced the cycle time of our innovation. And our reimagined approach to QuickBooks has really, it's shown unbelievable results. So you see some of the metrics here. So our small businesses on average get paid 5 days earlier, and they save 12 hours of work per month. Because once again, we've eliminated that end-to-end experience where they had to do the work manually before. And our engagement soared, so it went into the millions. 78% of customers saying that AI makes it easier to run their business, and 68% saying that allows them to spend more time growing their business and not just operating their books. And it's really important too that for us, the AI isn't replacing humans, it's actually augmenting the humans. So we have a combination of both AI agents and human agents working together in the product. And as you can see, overall, our scale of AI, our scale of data has continued to grow. Over 60 billion machine learning predictions per day, 625,000 attributes per business, and we hold over 1,000 patents. So this is the kind of evolution or innovation that this has driven. So to go back to the beginning of the story, sometimes you have an idea and you roll it out and it fails, and it failed because it was the wrong idea. Sometimes it was just not the right time. And so it's really important that if you have a great idea, you basically continue and you persist and you push forward, because we're just in the process of rolling out something we refer to as Intuit Intelligence, where we're taking the best of this end-to-end AI automation that I just talked about, and we're adding to it this new conversational interface, because now our customers are actually ready to have a conversation with the product. They want to talk about their data. They want to ask questions. And so if we hadn't taken this journey, we wouldn't have learned and we wouldn't have gotten to the point where we created these amazing end-to-end experiences. But now we're actually going back and augmenting it with this conversational interface as well. So our customers get the best of both worlds. So let me leave you with a couple of takeaways. So the first is you have to innovate with speed and get out in front of customers as fast as possible. And when I say get out in front of customers, we had to get really comfortable with testing at scale. So it used to be that we would test, we'd say, okay, let's roll this out to 10 customers. Let's roll this out to 1,000 customers. And now we actually have launch plans where we say, how quickly can we show this to 1 million customers? Because that's really when you get the actual feedback that you need. So second is you do have to bring your customers along. As I talked about before, many times there's great ideas, really good ideas, but your customers aren't actually ready for it. We actually had to work very closely with our customers to make sure they're actually ready for these innovations. And in some cases, our product actually has to, in the process of rolling out these features, rolling out these capabilities, we had to teach as we actually roll them out. And finally, maybe even the most important one is you have to cultivate AI fluent leadership. You absolutely have to have great AI savvy folks, great talent on the front lines across all these different functions that I just talked about. But really, to make it work, your entire leadership team has to be AI savvy. You have to do your job with AI. You have to make sure that they lead with AI. And if they themselves are not AI savvy, if they're not AI fluent, they can't lead an AI workforce. So thank you. That's our story at Intuit. With that, I'll turn it back to Stephen.
Thanks, Alex. It's such a powerful example of turning a false start into lasting progress. Intuit didn't just adopt new technology, they reimagined how their teams work and deliver value. We've covered a lot of territory today, but in the short time we have left, I want to share with you a few insights and some practical mitigation steps that you can take when you experience failure. Once you see failures happening, what should you do? First, when everyone's status is green, look for watermelons. Right? Look for the inputs, not just the outputs, and ask, have we built a culture of blame or of trust? This ties back to that Amazon leadership principle, diving deep, earning trust, and focusing on the inputs over the outputs. Next, when process becomes the product, simplify and unblock. Do you see your team spending more time coordinating than creating? Identify the hotspots where those dependencies are slowing you down and invest in removing those bottlenecks. As we like to say, invest and simplify. As leaders, your job is to constantly reduce friction so that others can do more. Third, when your structure mirrors your past and not your future, reorganize for speed. Shifting from static teams to dynamic work streams, organizing around capabilities and outcomes, not departments. In an AI-driven world, whatever might have been your best practice yesterday can be your bottleneck today. When your IT shows up with answers instead of questions, pause and reframe. Flip the conversation to start with the business outcome that's needed and co-create with the business, not for it. And finally, when everyone's chasing the shiny object, pause and ask, who's the customer? Always start with the customer. Invention that doesn't solve a customer's need is not innovation. I want to thank you all for joining us. Thanks very much.